across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is the Friday weekend edition. So grateful that you can join us. As you might imagine, we're going to be talking about a number of things. It looks like the country may be going to war. We'll talk about that. We certainly have a Supreme Court decision that's come down that struck down many of the tariffs, not all, but most of the tariffs, probably a better way to say that, of Donald Trump. And we'll get into a variety of other topics. And in order to help us out, we have Liberty McArtor, who was, of course, sitting here yesterday as the host of course, the Next Generation Roundtable. She's also the host of the Know Why podcast, co-host here at Point of View, as well as Jeff Mateer, who is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer for First Liberty Institute. We always like to start off with some First Liberty comments, especially religious liberty comments. And this week we had the National Religious Broadcasters Convention taking place in Nashville. We stayed here this time. But just down the road, interestingly enough, Jeff, you have a story of a teacher who was banished from the classroom simply because she said, I just cannot bring myself to actually read to the kids from this same-sex marriage book. And because this happened in Tennessee and it was just down the road, you've gotten a lot of PR that came out of the National Religious Broadcasters Convention this week.
Yeah, it was pretty good timing for this one. So this is actually it's a man. It's Eric Rivera.
Oh,
so
okay.
Eric is a first grade teacher, or I should say was a first grade teacher, and a committed follower of Christ. And he was asked as part of the language arts curriculum to read to his first grade class a book that highlights same-sex marriage. And Eric, in advance of that, he saw he was going to do this, and he holds to a traditional view of marriage. He felt like he could not do that in good conscience. And so he actually just asked another first grade teacher, hey, would you flip this period? And that happened. And the principal found out about it and said that was unacceptable. And Eric was removed from the classroom. And at this public school in Tennessee, the principal basically took the view that if you have a traditional view of marriage, you're unfit to teach first grade. And what we found out later is that there had been no notification, which is contrary to Tennessee law, to the parents about this potentially objectionable material. So you can imagine the uproar in this community in Nashville, which a suburb of Nashville is a little, we probably got listeners in Tennessee. It's not the most liberal area of the country, and it's certainly a state that certainly holds to traditional views generally, and specifically with regard to marriage. And so we'll see what happens. What we do know is the school has not responded to us as of this morning, and they've not talked to the media. But what they've instead done is they've gone into bunker mentality. They've canceled all the events with parents. And so they're just going to try to ride it out, apparently, which I think is, it just shows you just sort of the disconnect in so many places with educators. But, we've got cases now across the country, which we're just simply, we're asking for. If a school is going to do this, let the parents know.
Don't you know?
And give the parents the opportunity to opt out. The easy solution, of course, is school boards should take control of these things, and they shouldn't be teaching this nonsense to children. Again, these are first graders who they're trying to put.
And I might just mention that we do have your article there, the letter that you've sent. It's a fairly lengthy one indeed. And Liberty is just a good illustration of the fact that we have some school boards and we have some administrators that think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with teaching some of these ideas to first graders.
Well, this is something that parents need to be aware of. Once again, we see that the education that so many public schools are providing is not neutral. It is religious in a different nature. I actually am rereading The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. And in the first chapter, he talks about how he was reading an English textbook but they were really conditioning students. They weren't teaching anything about grammar or English or anything like that, but trying to condition them with philosophical ideas. We're seeing the same exact thing here. This is part of a language arts curriculum. Why did they have to read that in a language arts class unless they are trying to condition students with certain ideas? And that's exactly what's happening.
No, that's exactly. And then anyone, if there's a teacher listening and you're facing this issue, our victory in the Groff case, which the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of Gerald Groff, and that he had the right to observe his religious beliefs, and in his case, honoring the Sabbath, that he could ask his employer for a religious accommodation. That's what Eric did here.
Yes.
And the school rejected. And the Supreme Court said 9-0, unless there's an undue hardship, and remarkably, the words undue hardship actually mean undue hardship. Like, for instance, another teacher switching class with you. No hardship. Do that.
Yeah.
But I think what sort of in the blessing in this case is, yes, Eric should win on that. But what we found out is the school's not following Tennessee law. So we've let the Tennessee Attorney General know about this case. He's a good ally, Jonathan Skrmetti. And so stay tuned on this one, because I think the school knows they're in trouble if they've they've canceled. And I think this is something I got this on the way coming here, that they've canceled the book fair for next week. Now, I don't know about you, but because you're homeschooled, so did you have book fairs? Okay, I loved. To me, I just remember as an elementary, that was my favorite day of the year. And my parents would give me X amount of money to spend at the book fair. So I'm sure we've disappointed some children.
Don't you know?
But what did we protect them from?
What kind of books?
I think that's exactly. They know they had a problem, and who knows what kind of books were at this book fair. So
that's not a sign of confidence.
No, that they can't. So I do feel bad, because I'm sure there's some kids who are really disappointed that they're not going to get to participate in the book fair next week. But I think we've protected them. And stay tuned on this one, because I think we're going to hear some good news out of all places. Do you expect to hear this in California? This is Tennessee.
Yeah.
So
good. You do have a case out of California, which we've talked about before. But again, if you would like to find that article, it's available on the website at pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to firstliberty.org. But as we go to our break, when we come back, we want to talk about the Supreme Court struck down a very significant number of Donald Trump's tariffs. He was the first president to ever invoke what's called the IEEP. So we'll be talking about that. That stands for International Emergency Economic Powers. This was an act put together in 1977 when you might have been dealing with some kind of crisis. He argued that this was a crisis, and yet the court, in a 6-3 decision, argued that this was certainly trying to interpret that particular act in ways that were unprecedented. And of course, it raises a couple of good questions we'll talk about after the break, and that is, will they have to refund the billions of dollars to importers, since some of that's already been paid by higher prices? And what about some of these trade deals? So we have a lot to cover, and it is the case that came down today from the Supreme Court. So we'll take a break, get some perspective around the table right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The founders of this country believed that civic authorities should protect, promote, and encourage religion and morality. Mark David Hall explains that in his book, Did America Have a Christian Founding? The framers of the Constitution were skeptical of established religion, but also wanted to provide a space where religious ideas could promote morality and civic virtue. This twofold concept can be found in the First Amendment. They did not want to establish a national church, even though some colonies had state churches. Mark David Hall describes in some detail what some states, previously colonies, did to promote morality. They even describe that many times the Continental Congress and later Congress called for days of prayer, fasting, and thanksgiving. They passed numerous resolutions setting aside time for prayer. Congress also endorsed the project to publish what is called the Aiken Bible, but the funding came from the Pennsylvania legislature since Congress was short of funds. And one of the first acts of Congress was to appoint congressional chaplains. Presidents who took the oath of office did so by placing their hand on the Bible and ending the oath with the words, "So help me God." Now, some critics question whether George Washington said those words, but virtually every state required them in their prescribed oaths, so it would have been unremarkable for Washington to add those words to his oath of office. And while we're talking about George Washington, we should remember his famous observation that of all the dispensations and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He and the other founders believe we should promote and encourage religion and morality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Liberty McArtor in studio, Jeff Mateer, and let me just mention again that we have quite a number of articles on this issue of Trump's tariffs. I just a minute ago was reading from an article in the New York Times. We're going to focus some time and attention on one that was in National Review from Brittany Bernstein. We also have one from the Wall Street Journal. They're all basically saying the same thing. There are sometimes a little bit of a bias, but in most cases, these are just very straightforward documents. But if I can, for just a minute before I go around the round table, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, wrote the majority opinion. And I love what he wrote at one point. He says, based on two words separated by 16 other words, and it is the IEEP, which again stands for International Emergency Economic Powers Act, rights regulate and importation. First of all, those words are 16 words apart. Second of all, the word tariff never shows up. And Jeff, I'll come to you first because sometimes we've been critical in the past, haven't we not, about Joe Biden finding some obscure particular act, law, policy, and thus using it to justify something which isn't really in the Constitution.
Right. And I was part of a team when I was at the Texas Attorney General's office that we would sue the Obama administration. We'd sue the Biden administration for when the president exceeded its authority. And I'm holding up, those who can see it, the camera, I'm holding up the United States Constitution.
Good idea.
And that's where we should start. So does the president have the constitutional power to, on his own, impose tariffs on foreign countries? And I can read my U.S. Constitution, and I do not see under the powers of the executive branch the power to impose tariffs. Instead, I see that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress alone the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, i.e. tariffs, and they do that solely. So, you know, as a conservative who believes in this document, the Constitution, who believes that you should comply with it, there's not exceptions to compliance. I mean, we get it from the left all the other time. They want a, quote, living Constitution. Well, living Constitution means all you need is 5 votes on the Supreme Court to reinterpret words. For 50, 60 years, we've been fighting against that. That if you are an originalist, if you are a textualist, it's hard to see that the president had this. And we last year when this case came up, we had a discussion, and we were very skeptical. Right. Does the president have this power? One of the things we focused on is there really an emergency that gives them this power?
That's the other part of that. Yeah.
Is there really an emergency? But then you look at the actual statutory language, as you pointed out, Kerby, it's just not there. And what's interesting, the conservatives have there's a doctrine called the major questions doctrine. And if I go too far in the weeds, Liberty throws something at me. But
that's okay, I'm interested.
But there's something called the major questions doctrine, which basically says, and again, conservatives, this is something that we like because what it says is unless Congress has specifically authorized an action, it's not permissible, especially in those areas that are major questions, like the big things, like imposing tariffs on foreign countries.
Right.
And actually Justice Gorsuch does a great job. The opinions, by the way, there's 170 pages of opinions. So I did get a chance to quickly, did I read every word? No, but I read a lot of words. But Justice Gorsuch, in a concurring opinion, points out, look, if you apply that doctrine, it clearly it doesn't pass the test. So it was 6-3, Chief Justice Roberts in the majority. The dissenters were Thomas Alito and Kavanaugh. Interesting, Kavanaugh, who writes the dissent, basically brings up the point that you do is, well, if we do this, what are we going to do? But
that's not a good argument.
I mean, if that's like, I did something, but now because it's the bad consequences, that doesn't pass the reasonable test to me.
It could have been 7-2, because I was just going to bring that up. Thank you for doing that for just a second, because Justice Kavanaugh in his dissent notes there will be two complexities. One, the potential refund process. This is going to be figuring out how you're going to pay refunds when earlier in the week we already talked about the Federal Reserve has already said that we consumers have paid most of it anyway. So that's already been passed on. I don't know how you get a refund process. And the second, what about the trade deal? So his argument against it wasn't that the president had the authority. It was, well, this is just going to be hard to unscramble an egg. But that's not a real compelling argument.
I mean, that sounds like what liberals do.
Yes.
And that's what they argued, quite frankly. They argued in response to why Roe shouldn't be overturned. Oh, we can't overturn it because if we do, it's going to create all these problems. I mean, I don't like the argument we can't do something because it's going to create problems. That doesn't seem that logic doesn't seem to hold.
Yeah, that allows, it seems, people to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Should have been asking the Constitution, maybe specifically Congress, for permission first. So ideally, I'm glad to see it because I think, I'm with Jeff as a conservative. I'm glad to see Trump appointed more originalists to the Supreme Court, which is great. But that means that they have to be loyal to the Constitution and not to him, which he seems to misunderstand sometimes.
Well, which goes back to your question to me originally is, so this is something we can have a debate, and we've talked about, are tariffs good or tariffs bad, right? And that's a fair debate.
Yes.
But that's what
how is the question.
And that's that's what Congress should do. And so we criticized Obama and Biden when they would take actions that you knew couldn't get through Congress, right? I mean, if regarding immigration, for instance, if President Obama making executive orders with regard to immigration that are matters that really should be done according to the Constitution by the Congress. Well, this is the same thing.
Right.
This is an issue that should be done. So let's have a debate. And don't forget, the Republicans had the presidency, the House, and the Senate. They still have the presidency, the House, and the Senate. If the American people want tariffs, then let President Trump make his argument, go to the House, because go to the House, and then go to the Senate and pass a law, and the president can sign it. I mean, that's the solution here, if this is a good policy. But no president, and we can like Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump on religious liberty has been amazing, and I will praise him over and over again for his actions regarding religious liberty. But if this had gone the other way, I can't imagine the next time when we have a Democrat president who would use this decision to enforce rules and laws on the American public that as a conservative Christian, we would hate. And so it's the Supreme Court got it right today, and I'm glad they did. And again, if you want tariffs and you want to support the president, then go to Congress and pass a law.
And just a practical question. If I'm understanding the dissent correctly, this is still fairly narrow. It's not going to affect every single tariff.
It's the IEEPA tariffs, and there are other tariffs.
There are other tariffs, and actually there are other what are saying actually, and I caught just a tail of it. The president's was having a press conference, and
having something else, but we'll leave it at that.
He's not happy at some of the justices, including two of them that he appointed. Let's not forget that. Two of his justices that he appointed, and but they're now claiming, the White House is now claiming that we have other authority that could do this, and there may be other laws. And which just means we're going to just have another lawsuit. And if why didn't you cite those laws the first time? But let's not confuse that with reality with what's happening.
Let's give people some history for just a minute. You probably have heard of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and that came from Reed Smoot and Willis Hawley, and that was in the 1930s, actually 1929. And of course, that's one that didn't work out so well, but it was a congressional act. That's the point I'm making.
It didn't work out so well because it caused the Great Depression, or at least contributed to it.
Yeah.
But that's a policy debate, though.
Yeah,
and we can debate.
And by the way, I tried to be fair. I did some commentaries on it. I got to do another one now on tariffs. Whether or not it helped or hurt, it probably hurt. I don't know if it caused it, but again, it is certainly a good example. Back to the point you're making, Jeff, and that is when we talked about some of the most significant tariffs in the history of this country. What happened? It came through Congress, right?
Yeah, because
whether you like them or not.
That's what this says. And if we're going to follow,
because it's like a tax.
If we're going to follow the Constitution,
let's follow the Constitution.
And we should do it if you're a rule of law person.
Well, talk about following the Constitution. We're about ready to go to war, and I don't remember there being a War Powers Act or anything else that will justify that. But when we come back, honestly thought that'd be what we'd be talking about today. But of course, Supreme Court and a few other things changed that. But two articles that we've posted. One, Trump moves closer to war with Iran. That's from Axios, which is a little more of a liberal look at that. Then another one, U.S. amasses forces in the Middle East. Looks like we're going to war, whether we voted for it or not. And we'll talk about that right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Jeff Mateer and Liberty McArtor. Let me open up the phones too, 1-800-351-1212. First of all, we have, of course, talked about tariffs. You may want to talk about that, but are we going to war? The Trump administration is closer to a major war in the Middle East, so says Barak Ravid. In this particular article from Axios, U.S. military operation in Iran would be a massive weeks-long campaign. I think Jeff and I might disagree with that, but that's what he's saying. Sources said that you might have, and it looks like we're going to have a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign, which could be much broader than scope. Posted some material about having the Trump advisors, that'd be Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who met with the Iran's foreign minister. Of course, you've heard some people say, well, the talks went well, but it's still very clear that there are some very important issues there. And again, Vice President J.D. Vance said, well, we might have the president have to set some red lines, or we are going to maybe have some conflict. More than 150 U.S. military cargo flights have moved weapons, 50 fighter jets just within the 24 hours in this article. Also posted one just giving you a sense of what is happening. This deployment is unlike anything the United States has done since 2003 when it amassed forces before the invasion of Iraq. I think it's pretty fair to say that Donald Trump doesn't bluff, and something is on the offing, maybe a few weeks away, but it certainly looks like, unless there is a remarkable change of mindset in Iran, we're going to go to war.
I think we are. I think certainly the show of force is impressive. And I'm sure if I were a military member, I'm thinking we're going because that's the mindset that we have. I do wonder, and I do agree with you. I disagree with that. I can't imagine that Donald Trump would engage in a long, protracted operation that would last, weeks, months. I think I'm not sure if it's in this quote or maybe it's something I was reading the other day that about war. That's something certain is you're always going to underestimate the cost and the amount of time, and I think that's probably a fair that's probably a fair assessment. But I do think with regard to this, I cannot, knowing that this president, who is generally he's not a strict isolationist, but generally his tendencies, and I think he opposed originally the Bush operation in Iraq. He seems to be generally someone who doesn't see long-term military involvement, whether that be Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine. That's not. So if he did anything, I think it would be short-term. But then the question is, okay, what is the objective? Is the objective to take out some nuclear sites? Based upon intelligence, I know the Israelis would like that, right? Or is the objective a larger one, which is a regime change? Now, I think that is, if you use the gambling analogy, that is a roll of the dice because, does that ever work? I guess if you completely, I guess there was a regime change in Iraq because we just, we took everybody out. And so, but that was a longer operation, which included ground troops. And I don't think anyone is thinking that we are going to have some sort of ground troops deployed I don't see it in any amounts. Now, maybe there would be some strategic forces who would go run some operations, and we'd see our SEALs team, doing something in some specific targets, or picking up some people, or taking out some people, whatever it would be. But I do not think. I don't think whatever it will be lengthy. I think it'll be in and out, and they'll blow up some stuff. They'll take out some people, and they'll be done. But I don't know, Don. Gosh, you'd never want to bet against Donald Trump on anything.
Yeah, I think that this is a matter of timing and looking to the future for both on Trump's part and Israel's part. I know Israel is advocating, or at least that's what's being reported, which not surprisingly, because they know they have a strong ally in Trump. I think that becomes less certain depending on who the next president is. Even if you have a Vance, he's, I think, maybe going to be even lean more isolationist than Trump. He definitely seems to be more in touch with the younger rising right, which is very America first and isolationist and opposed to foreign entanglements at all. And definitely, a Democratic president would be less strong on this issue. And, Trump may be looking to the future as well, because it's in America's long-term interest to have a weakened Iran and a strengthened Israel as the only democracy and our strongest ally in that region. So I think there may be some chess playing here, saying Iran is weakened. We want to do this now while Trump's in office, and we've got the alliance with Israel that is strong and secure, and maybe hopefully secure some safety for the future. Maybe that's what's going through the minds a little bit.
Well, again, one of the things that we also have to recognize is the possible collateral damage. Thousands of U.S. service members are in the region, and they're certainly within the range of some of the Iranian ballistic missiles. That's one of the articles they've posted here as well. And at the same time, another justification, in addition to taking out missiles, taking out any nuclear capability, was to, in a sense, send a signal that you can't continue to kill off all these protesters in the streets. As a matter of fact, we have, I think, Liberty future articles that will come out in Outlook about this, because one of the fastest growing churches in the world is in Iran.
Yep.
But this is an underground church, and they are being persecuted. So there are a lot of boxes to check, but there's a lot of negatives to it as well.
No, I think that's important to think about, because again, that's where I think the limited action, you minimize that, because you go do what you're going to do. If there's nuclear facilities to take out, you take them out. If there's certain leaders you believe that you can get to, then you do that as well. But the longer it is, then unless you completely in a strike wipe them out, there's no doubt that the first response will be Iran will do something to Israel. And there'll be a barrage of Israel against Israel. Another question is, what will the other Arab countries do? Do they view this as? And there's no doubt that at the State Department, I'm sure Secretary Rubio is working overtime, and his people are working overtime, talking to our other allies in the region, because you don't want to provoke the Saudis and others into some sort of response as well. Now, I think that would be highly unlikely, because it's just it would not be for the Saudis' advantage. And then, Russia is out there, China is out there. What do they do? Do they participate? Is this an opportunity? We don't want this to be Korea. We don't want this to be Vietnam. And we don't want to have what's going on in Iran be a surrogate for larger world politics. So no doubt the State Department's working overtime, assuring people. And then what do the Europeans do? Mm-hmm. You never count on the French. Fortunately, we don't have to fly over French air territory. That was in the past, right, where we were denied access to go over French territory. And I think that's why we've got those two massive aircraft carriers,
which I'll talk about in a minute.
The Lincoln and the
Gerald Ford.
And the Gerald Ford. Yeah,
that's right. Let me go to a phone call here. KNLB in California. Kathy, I think you wanted to talk about China, so go for it.
Yes, it is about China and Russia. They have been helping with the nuclear, but are you aware of what's going on in the Red Sea and Aden? They are trying to. Trump is trying to shift what's going on economically with the Belt and Road, and
right.
Israel has acknowledged that Somaliland as a nation, because they haven't been given nation status, but they have achieved having their own military, their own passports, and everything that Somalia has not had. And some of this it might interest you if you went over to the Horn and Red Sea news and look at what's going on over there as well as what's going on in Europe, because Israel has a large deposit of oil and natural gas that could eventually pipeline being sent to Europe.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break, and a couple of issues there we'll talk about after the break. The Belt and Road Initiative of China, and by the way, we are hoping to have Gordon Chang on and some others talk about that as well, but let's take a break and come back right after these important messages.
After a House vote that ended the recent mercifully short government shutdown, Speaker Mike Johnson fielded questions from reporters. He probably didn't expect to be asked to interpret scripture that day, but he did a great job of it. The questioning reporter began by invoking the Pope. He said Pope Leo has cited Matthew 25:35 to critique Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. In an exhortation last October, the Pope quoted Christ's words, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me," stating that the Church has always recognized in migrants a living presence in the world. Speaker Johnson promised to post a theological dissertation he drafted during the Biden administration. He proceeded to give the reporters a quick summary, stating, "Borders and walls are biblical. From the Old Testament to the New, God has allowed us to set up our civil societies and have separate nations." He acknowledged that we are to welcome the sojourner and love our neighbor as ourselves, and continued, "But what's also important in the Bible is that assimilation is expected and anticipated and proper. When someone comes into your country, comes into your nation, they do not have the right to change its laws or to change its society. They're expected to assimilate. We haven't had a lot of that going on." Reporting on the speaker's remarks, the Washington Stand's Joshua Arnold pointed to God's command to Moses in Deuteronomy 31:12. "Assemble the people, men, women, and little ones, and the sojourner within your towns, that they may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to do all the words of this law." Now that's assimilation. The Washington Stand report refers to Mike Johnson's posted defense of immigration enforcement, in which he differentiates between the admonition to welcome the sojourner directed at individuals and Romans 13 command that civil authorities bring punishment upon the wrongdoer. We enforce borders for love of the people inside them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Tech once again, Kathy raised a number of issues. Let me just say in passing, probably we'll cover this idea of Somaliland in the future. There is Somalia and then Somaliland, which is actually a break-off state near the Horn of Africa. If you look at your map, you'll see where that is. It is not officially recognized by the United States, but it is partially recognized by some, and so that's another issue. But I think the bigger issue we're going to talk about next hour, because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, went to the Munich summit, and in some respects, last year, J.D. Vance gave the bad cop. This year, he was the good cop. But anyway, the idea that are you going to be part of this partnership, not only to deal with Ukraine, but other aspects of this as well? And of course, the big question I think right now, Jeff, is will the Europeans sit this out? Probably. Will the United States and Israel get involved, and how long? That's the big question on the table, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think that's why I think it for the Trump administration, a shorter action is easier to manage, because you just go and you do it and you're done.
Right.
And obviously, I think our diplomats throughout Europe and the world will provide notice to those who need to know. I'm sure the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom gets a heads up, by the way, that this is happening, and so our other allies. I'm sure it's minutes, it's not hours that we're giving notice.
Yeah.
There's some allies who are more trusted than others, and certainly those in Europe. But if you're done, then it's done. But if it's a prolonged action, then you really are going to ask for support. And what do you want to deal with? A UN resolution condemning you and all those things that could follow. So. I don't think we don't need Europe, and Trump is not one. He's not a coalition builder in that sense, and so I can't imagine him going and trying to build a coalition of European allies who support this action in Iran. I just don't. That doesn't seem like out of the Trump playbook.
It seems like there is more potential for negative fallout, because even when you're comparing the size of the force that is approaching right now, it's much larger than what was outside Venezuela before that, which was a very pinpoint specific extraction.
Right.
And so I do think that, are they planning for something longer, or is it so that they can quickly address any fallout and still get out quickly and not have it be a prolonged thing? But, it is a larger force that's amassing right now.
I mean, and the other are the political calculations for the Trump administration and the Trump team. because I mean, where's America on this? I mean, what? I mean, is there?
Nobody voted for Donald Trump thinking he was going to have a war in the Middle East.
No, because I compare this to
Right?
when we went into Iraq. I mean, the American population and a strong majority supported the
Right.
actions. The case had been built, and that's why I kind of raise it. I mean, why are we doing this? I mean, that needs to be the question. Why are we doing this? And I think there are portions of the Republican base who do not support this to the extent it's being. And I know probably with Kelly last week you had a chance to talk about some of the divisions in some elements of the conservative base with regard to support of Israel.
Yeah.
And so if this is perceived as just a pro-Israel move, well, then there's parts of even the Republican base who will have issues with that, and no doubt the Democrats. And so we've got. I mean, we're not long for midterms, right? I mean, in Texas, we're going to be
big question.
In
Yes.
Texas, we're early voting for primary right now,
I've already voted.
and November's going to come quickly.
Yes.
And so things you're doing now could impact a November
They will.
election.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't get a sense that the American people right now are outraged that you've got to do something against Iran.
No, that's tough. Well, and again, one of the articles I had posted originally, and then I took it back off because we'll talk about it next week. It's official. Ray Dalio says the world order has broken down, in which that's where some of the phrase about if indeed it breaks down, you move from a trade war and a technology war to a capital war to a military war. And at that case, as he said, what happens, you can never predict, and it's always worse than you think it's going to be. So that is the case. So the best case you could make right now by Donald Trump would be think back to October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel. How much better are we in this country, and how much better are our allies there since then? Because now you don't have an Iranian nuclear power. You don't have Iran with anything other than a real economic basket case, which keeps them from funding the Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and the rest. You just have a whole set of things that used to be very significant threats, not just Israel, because people say, are you just becoming Israel first instead of America first? I mean, Saudi Arabia and all these other countries. And let's, if we can, one of the things, Liberty, you and I have been talking off the air, if Iran closes off the Straits of Hormuz, we probably could survive without oil for a time in the United States. But it would be really difficult. I don't think Japan and some of these countries that are totally dependent upon oil could survive. So there are situations where sometimes we say, man, Iran is 6,000 miles away from us. What kind of impact would that have to you as you're raising your kids?
Mm-hmm, right. I think those are the questions that people are asking. I will say, with regard to how popular it is, the people who are very America first, Tucker Carlsons and et cetera, are very vocal. But recently we did an Outlook issue on the new GOP and everything like that. So I was researching the numbers. And so the Manhattan Institute had actually done a really deep poll, a wide poll. I think this might not be top of mind for a lot of voters. They may not initially understand why does it matter, but when you talk about, okay, this actually can support America's interests, it can affect me in my life, I think they may come around, because 67% of current GOP voters support peace through strength, a little more traditional, views on that. And even 72% of Republicans with the favorable view of Tucker Carlson, who will definitely be criticizing this, we know, actually support a proactive military forward approach. So I think maybe some of those who are more likely to criticize this are very loud, but when it comes to what people actually support, I think a lot of GOP supporters may trust Trump on this and say, well, this turns out to be important.
But what happens when you go to the gas station?
Yeah.
And your gas. And
I guess it depends on how quickly it comes back down.
And we're already seeing it. I mean,
That's
just
true.
in the
That's
last
true.
2 days.
Yes, we are.
Gas is going up.
Stock market, all those kind of things.
And then that's
yeah.
the next one. I mean, the next is what's the market? What will the markets do? And we know that Donald Trump and apparently his attorney general as well, are very interested in what the markets are doing. And so I think I really. That's why I think, if anything, it's going to be limited. I know the Israelis, and plus the Israelis they want us just to wipe them out. And I get that from the Israeli, but we're not Israel. We have to do what's best for the interest of America. Mine is, I just think Donald Trump needs to make a better case.
I think so too.
For why we're going to do something. What are we doing? What's the threat? The threat is because they have nuclear, and we can't let them develop nuclear weapons. Is that it? Is it we're supporting this regime change, and that's what we're doing? But he just needs to make a case to the American public.
And I think that's something that certainly Marco Rubio could do, and he'd be good if he sent him back out there again to do so. We're going to take a break. We'll take some phone calls. I suspect some of you have some comments about, are we going to war, and what might be the implications of that. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We have a mass of material to cover in the second hour. Probably won't get to all of it. We'll do our best. Be right back.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. Now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jeff Mateer, Liberty McArtor with us. And one of the other articles I might just mention, earlier in the week, I did play just a few of the clips and of what Marco Rubio said when he actually went to the Munich summit. And some respects, we said that a year ago, J.D. Vance was kind of bad cop. He played good cop. And people have been applauding some of the things that Marco Rubio had said, including a standing ovation. So this particular article, Christianity Isn't Dead in the West, is a reminder of the fact that some of this is a spiritual warfare. And that's why I thought we would go to the next caller here, which is up there in Alaska, KJNP. And Norman, I think you want to speak to that issue. So go for it.
Very much. As we all know, as believers and followers in Christ, we are definitely seeing everything being played out. We know that by the end of Revelation, God will judge the Babylonian system in the sense of the words. If we understand it's never gone away, we know what's coming. We can look at the dots before we even get to Revelation 13, for example. But the most obvious thing that Americans should be asking about what are we about to do is how many fronts of war can we take on at once? Just look at the mess in the Western Hemisphere with the socialists of the North in Canada. That's our next door neighbor here. And then we've got, and that's why, of course, Alberta is trying to secede, and they got the vote ready to happen.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
But the real point is, let's go back to just look at how many fronts of war. So look at the Western Hemisphere. We've got Cuba to deal with. We've got, Venezuela. that he stopped, them from taking over Guyana for the big super oil field there. What's happening is if they stop this flow of oil and the choke point, it's going to be mass chaos. I just want to point out what Michael Savage brought up on his program years ago. And he said, you could stop all this by just stopping Islamic prophecy, take out their holy sites, just that alone, and their whole religion falls apart. This, worship of the moon god and all of it. And, he's coming from a Jewish perspective. The point is, if we don't look at it from the point of view of, look what happened to London, look what's happening to America from within. And our biggest problem is at home. We need to take care of the business at hand here, where this rise of these leftist Marxists, they're like Bolsheviks in terms of they want to overthrow our country. What's going to trigger them off? And this is my biggest concern. We need to deal with home before we can help these other nations.
Okay. Let me give another caller just a chance, maybe a slightly different perspective out in South Carolina, WAGP. Nancy, thank you for calling today.
Well, thank you for letting me give my opinion, and that is somewhat aligned with your previous caller, but I disagree. I think these mullahs and this Islamic system is the biggest enemy we have as far as their support for Iran all over the world, all the terrorism, the sales of people here, the building of mosques here. We have to confront that, yes, but I think if we took out the mullahs in Iran, I think that would go weaken that whole system over there. It would go a long way toward resolving some of these other issues. And I'm not worried about the price of gasoline so much. I think that's a problem, but I think them closing off the Straits of Hormuz is a problem. We've got to take care of Iran. We just got to. I support the president on this.
Sure. Just thought I'd go around the round table. You've heard slightly different perspectives on that, and I think it makes the case, Jeff, that if you really want to be engaged in what could be, let's hope it's not a protracted war, you've got to make the case a little more significantly than has been made so far.
No, I think that's exactly right. And the others, I mean, what's the phrase, 1 foot in? I mean, if you got to go in all in or not get in at all. And I think that's part of the points that these folks are expressing. I mean, I think the president has to make the case. What exactly is he doing? Is this are we just going to take out some strategic targets? Why are we doing that? Or are we really, what we're trying to do is wipe out the country and have a new regime? And then everything that follows that. Because I mean, that is the post-Iraq war, has that been a good process? I mean, is it good? Yes, it's good. Saddam Hussein is not there. Iraq is not a problem per se, but is it stable? Yeah, sort of stable. But what would Iran be if Iran? And now that's not a reason that the current regime should absolutely stay in place and should absolutely be allowed to abuse its people. So I don't know. I mean, I'm
Iran is a big country, hesitant. 93 million people, Ted Cruz, that was the question Tucker Carlson asked him. But anyway, I mean, if you've ever looked at a map, you realize that Iraq is one thing, Iran is something else. Yeah. And also the funding of that and the various proxies of Iran. Yeah. We are talking about something that is maybe not as threatening as Russia or China, but is threatening nevertheless.
Yeah, I think Nancy made a good point there, and I think that would be, for the case for, something to articulate how much significant funding comes out of Iran for terrorism all around the world and the threat that presents. But the gentleman prior, I think, made some good points too about are we all in? Are we all in on all of these fronts? We were talking about the Dunroe doctrine, right, in the Western Hemisphere, and how we were going to focus on strengthening that. So I think those were really two perspectives that are really representative of where a lot of voters are kind of weighing the issues.
There has always been this perception that Donald Trump is a little bit ADD. You understand why, especially with the tariffs and everything else. But we don't want foreign policy with ADD, which is why I keep coming back to Marco Rubio. So we come back, he did give a very significant speech primarily to the Europeans, but I think it relates to what happens globally. And so that is an article we've posted. Also, interesting enough, I put next to it one by John Stossel on Western Ideas Work. We need to come back and recognize that Christianity was a foundation of Western culture. Western ideas work. This idea of multiculturalism hasn't worked so well in other countries. You have the rise of a reaction even in the UK now to wanting to have, if you will, the UK first kind of movement and all the rest, because they're saying we have too many people from other countries who are not assimilating, don't agree with some of the foundational principles of the U.S. Constitution, of British Empire, whatever it might be. So Marco Rubio brings us back to some of those first principles. So I thought it would be appropriate to talk about that. And Jeff was looking at the same thing. I gave you some of the quotes from him earlier in the week, but if you want to find our article here about Europe and Christianity, it has the provocative title, Christianity Isn't Dead in the West. That's good news. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The founders of this country believed that civic authority should protect, promote, and encourage religion and morality. Mark David Hall explains that in his book, Did America Have a Christian Founding? The framers of the Constitution were skeptical of established religion, but also wanted to provide a space where religious ideas could promote morality and civic virtue. This twofold concept can be found in the First Amendment. They did not want to establish a national church, even though some colonies had state churches. Mark David Hall describes in some detail what some states, previously colonies, did to promote morality. They even describe that many times the Continental Congress and later Congress called for days of prayer, fasting, and thanksgiving. They passed numerous resolutions setting aside time for prayer. Congress also endorsed the project to publish what is called the Aiken Bible, but the funding came from the Pennsylvania legislature since Congress was short of funds. And one of the first acts of Congress was to appoint congressional chaplains. Presidents who took the oath of office did so by placing their hand on the Bible and ending the oath with the words, "So help me God." Now, some critics question whether George Washington said those words, but virtually every state required them in their prescribed oaths. So it would have been unremarkable for Washington to add those words to his oath of office. And while we're talking about George Washington, we should remember his famous observation that of all the dispensations and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He and the other founders believe we should promote and encourage religion and morality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we certainly have an article that I would commend to you by Barton Swaim. Christianity Isn't Dead in the West, and I will jump ahead to something he said that then will tie back to Marco Rubio, and that is he talks about the fact that you've had all these atheist and agnostic intellectuals who in recent years have surprised their audience by acknowledging Western society's ancient and continuing dependence on Christian concepts and values. One of those individuals is a man by the name of Tom Holland, who wrote the book Dominion. And then I had Tom Holland on the program. And then Jeff told me that Tom Holland, the atheist, is now a Christian. And so you are starting beginning to see some of these individuals who before were saying, we really just need to follow Voltaire, and of course he mentions H.G. Wells and Rousseau and B.F. Skinner and all sorts of individuals like that, because really we would be better without religion. They're all recognizing we've kind of seen what it looks like when you go to countries or societies or cultures or empires that don't have a Judeo-Christian base. And so Marco Rubio's speech the other day in Munich was a reminder that we are the inheritors of what you developed in Europe, John Locke and all sorts of other individuals we've mentioned before. And in some respects, there is a real schism that took place after 9/11. The West and the rest. And the West was based upon a Judeo-Christian foundation, and he reminds Europe of that. And at the end, I wasn't sure because I could see from the cutaways what some of the reaction would be. We got a standing ovation. Now, it wasn't all that different than what J.D. Vance said last year, but like I said, J.D. Vance tended to be more the bad cop and Marco Rubio the good cop. But we cannot continue, and I held up the other day a very good book that came out by Mark Stein, America Alone. Do we have to be alone, or can we depend on Europe to maybe recapture some of those Christian ideas? So what are your thoughts?
I mean, this, I think, was a very important speech, and I commend Secretary Rubio. I would say one of my first observations is it was very presidential.
Oh, yes.
And very presidential sounding. And I really do. You can contrast it, and I'm sure there are listeners who are J.D. Vance fans, but there was a contrast of tone. I mean, the message may have been the same in the end, or the point of the message, but I think Secretary Rubio delivered it just delivered it in a better manner. I would say, and I do appreciate Barton Swaim's article in the Wall Street Journal, but I would revise the title. Christianity isn't dead in the West yet. Because
it is dying.
There are
especially in Europe.
There are some certain signs, and it does remind me of, since we're talking about Europe and England in Monty Python's Holy Grail. I'm not dead yet. With the dead person. No, I'm not dead yet. We think it's dead, but they're not dead yet. And I think that's the point. And of course, I'm a big fan of Tom Holland and especially his book Dominion. I'd commend it to anyone who wants to really understand this issue of Christianity, of the importance of Christianity over time. And just real briefly, so this is just something I think, and I can say it on, we're all Christians in this room. I really think God just gave me this vision, because I did, as I think I've mentioned on the air, and I certainly have talked off the air about, had the opportunity to go to Africa a few months ago. Which was my first time to Africa on a mission trip, essentially. And we went up into the mountains, and there are 73 villages in the mountains, and only one of them has a Christian church. And so it's kind of like an early New Testament experience.
Yes.
But one of my takeaways from that was, in this village, in which has a church, which the church is central to the village. And it's a village of a couple thousand people. So it's not small. We're not talking hundreds. We're talking thousands. But this village, you see, the church is the Christian church, very much central to the affairs of the community. And then we would go to other villages, and you would see the men not working. You'd see them drinking and playing, gambling. And you saw, it's just like, yes, this is what we believe. It's Tom Holland's.
Yeah.
He's proving the thesis, and that isn't just something old. This is something today.
Yeah.
That when a church shows up in a village, it makes a difference. And the things that are problems, and look, it doesn't just, you flick the switch and it's automatically, but there's visible differences. And that's what I think about Europe. I think what we've seen is the church has been down, and the influence of the church is just it's been. But I think the Secretary's speech is, the history is there, and there are still coals of fire that can be fanned to cause this to come back. Very good. It's also a warning for us in America. that we're not there yet. But we could be there.
We're
at a crossroads too, and so a lot of wonderful things in that trip to Africa. But just to see that like, yes, the things that and certainly my work at First Liberty, the things that we're fighting for religious freedom, and because we want churches in our community. It's always crazy to me that these cities and towns who don't want any more church, we have too many. No, we don't have enough. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yesterday on the roundtable, we talked about the rise in, which is really, we talk about revival, but it really is the end of a nosedive in religious affiliation. And we're seeing young men really lead that staying in church, not leaving as quickly as in past generations. And one of the things we talked about yesterday is we're starting to see that in Europe too. Excuse me. So we're also seeing decline of the new atheism. And again, I think it's because people are seeing that this doesn't work. This was just a very small kind of example to piggyback off of what you were saying, Jeff. But among people who are involved in church, only 10% say they have no close friends. When you go to people who aren't involved in church, 20% say they have no close friends. And so isolation, which leads to, dissatisfaction in life and all of these other problems. People are realizing, wow, I can find that in church community. I can find that in traditional Christian beliefs. So I think that there are so many angles on this. We need to be talking about the political influence and the philosophical influence. What better year to emphasize that than now that Christianity's influence on America and Western civilization cannot be downplayed. It cannot be overstated. But then educationally and from an evangelical perspective too, people are hungry. They're hungry for what they've been missing with this decline in Christian affiliation. And to point out, like, you're not crazy. Like, actually, there are benefits of these Christian values that we built our culture upon, and returning to that. I mean, even Richard Dawkins said, I'm a cultural Christian now. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the four horsemen of the new atheism movement. So people are waking up to the truth.
Yeah, and I think of Ayan Harasi Ali, who speaking of Somaliland and Somalia, but who goes to Europe and becomes an atheist, and then as she as she's investigating it, is now a Christian, and so it's I think it's happening, and wouldn't it be only a God who would have a revival, a worldwide revival, start in Europe again. And of course, we know the English revival, that the awakening that leads to the American awakening with Wesley and Whitefield, and of course Edwards paving the way. So can we just? I mean, and that's what I pray for. I mean, I just to see a worldwide revival, and let's not give up on Europe yet. Let's not give up on Europe yet.
Mm-hmm. And again, just think about the anniversary here of William Tyndale's New Testament, which, again, another 250 years. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that happened in 1776. Of course, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and on and on and on, just so many things. But as we come to a break, you might want to read this article, because he reminds us the world's least Christianized societies are also the least open and tolerant. In short, the least liberal. Think of the moral pickle this way. If any one of the new atheists were to make a list of 10 nations in which they would agree to live in permanently, there's a good chance that all 10 would bear the indelible marks of Christian belief and practice. I would commend you the book by Tom Holland on Dominion, but I know most of you won't read it. But maybe I could do a booklet on that, maybe a Cliff's Notes version of that. We, of course, have the interview that we did with him when he wasn't a Christian. We need to bring him back now that he's a Christian and see if that's changed his perspective. I'm sure it's just emboldened him even more. We come back, though, another piece, Western Ideas Work. Oh, what a concept. We just were talking about that, and this comes from our friend John Stossel, and, of course, his interview with Heather McDonald. And then we just got to talk about what's going on in New York City. Sohan Mamdani takes New York hostage. Jeff, you cannot make this up. I put that in for you, so we'll talk about that right after these messages.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, as we were talking about Western culture, I thought for just another minute or two, we'd spend some time now looking at a very good piece by John Stossel. Almost all of the John Stossel pieces that we post go back to his interviews, so you can see the interview he's done with Heather McDonald. I did a search here and found at least a half a dozen articles by Heather McDonald we've posted on the website, pointofview.net. Of course, we've done a number of interviews over the years with Heather McDonald, and in some respects, one of the things, Liberty, we've oftentimes talked to Heather McDonald about is gender and diversity, all those kinds of things. But also in the interview, it got a little broader because at one point she was just talking about how in the West, the left is always attacking Western civilization. Mm-hmm. And she said, for the left to claim that the West is the source of inequity in the world, for example, oppression, racism, and the crushing of minority voices, and all the rest, that is so ignorant, so blind to the reality of history. If anything, she goes on to explain that the West came up with equal rights, tolerance, freedom for religious domination, and the rest. No, we're not perfect. As a matter of fact, Western civilization is successful because of the unending critique. We're always looking to try to do better. And I think it was just a reminder that whatever issue you look at, the West is always the whipping boy for the left, especially for the Marxist left. And this was just a reminder that even the criteria you use to evaluate the West comes from a Judeo-Christian foundation.
Yeah, read some history. This goes into kind of the failure of education for so many people over the last few generations, as if there wasn't racism or inequality or violence in non-Western cultures in ancient times. I mean, goodness, has anyone opened a book? But with regard to Western civilization and, again, Christianity's influence, this is just really, again, a failure of education because human rights, the children not working in factories, women having rights, and babies not being thrown out due to exposure. There are just so many things that when you research the influence of Western civilization and specifically the Christian ideas there, you see that the reason that you are enjoying the life that you're enjoying right now is thanks to that. But it goes back to worldview and how are people understanding the world. And everybody can see there's stuff wrong with the world. And if you don't have the right bad guy to blame, you're going to come up with a bad guy to blame. And so if you don't understand that all humans are sinful, but that's not the way that the world was supposed to be, then you are going to try to find an oppressor, Western civilization, the white man, whatever it is, to try to make sense of what's wrong with the world. And I think that people, in addition to having a lack of historical knowledge, I think that's a lot of what's happening.
The other thing I think about it, so you have, someone like Heather McDonald goes to a college campus and can't even express her views.
Very true.
Because she gets shouted down, and you that they don't even respect the right that you can actually engage in a discussion. Which again, that's a Western idea and a Western thought, which is the basis for the support of why do we have free speech?
Yeah.
Because we want to encourage debate and loving. I remember visiting London and going, and there was Speaker's Corner. And I've ever been to Speaker's Corner where they just people go up and they'll say, and when we were there, it's just like crazy things, but. That's good, right? We want, because then you
Public forum.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
and let's have a debate, because who wants to live in a society where you don't have debate? And that's why I think these, the people on the left, what do they want? They want only their views?
Yes. Mostly.
Yeah, and they don't want to hear anything contrary. And so you have to worry about things like, this is a trigger warning. And because I might offend somebody. And then the law we have, for years we were fighting against this thing called the heckler's veto. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm offended. Therefore, you can't have the speech. You can't have this monument, this memorial, because it offends me. Well, what? I mean, there's no base.
But it changes every few years.
Yeah, it's whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is the hot topic now? And of course, if you're not staying on tune, who knows what? What pronouns should you use or not use? And maybe it's today it's something, and tomorrow it's something else. So I think, as usual, John Stossel is pointing out something that is worthy for us. But I think you're right, Liberty, at the end of the day, it is a lack of it is a failure of our education system.
I love her line. Open a book.
Yeah.
Speaking of a book, Rodney Stark, we've had him on the program. He's no longer alive, but was at Baylor and wrote The Triumph of Christianity, The Rise of Christianity, The Victory of Reason. You can actually listen to one or two of the interviews we did with him when he was alive, but there are all sorts of people that have been documenting that. We mentioned one a minute ago, Tom Holland and Rodney Stark and many others. But I want to have just a little bit of time just to see Jeff's reaction, because one of the articles I've posted here, this comes from our friends at the Wall Street Journal, but I also have one from National Review. But this one is entitled, Zohran Mamdani Takes New York Hostage. Now, if you're not familiar, he is now threatening the Democrats in the state of New York, in Albany, New York, that either I'm going to have to raise property taxes, or else you, as a state legislature, need to raise taxes on businesses and top earners. And the part that I thought was interesting, which is why I posted the Wall Street Journal article, although both of these are really good. The Wall Street Journal article put this in perspective, Jeff, and that is that his inaugural budget is $127 billion, which he calls austere. But only in New York, they said, kids, his budget is $10 billion bigger than the entire budget of the state of Florida, which has a population that is, interesting, New York's population only about 40% of the Sunshine States. And of course, he wants to increase it dramatically because he just can't meet the budget with $127 billion. I have never seen anything like this, but I guess it goes back to the old phrase, the trouble with socialism is you sooner or later run out of everybody's money.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to be left? And I think that the last one in New York should turn out the lights, and it may be Mamdani, who is the last one. I mean, why would you? I mean, why would you stay if you have a choice?
I know.
Why would you stay?
Look at the numbers they're talking about
and
here.
It's just he's trying to bankrupt the system, right? I mean, he has to be. And that's just, I think when I first read this and he said he which he amusingly called austere, I'm thinking, I don't think you know what that word means.
You keep saying that word.
Yeah, austere. I don't
that's
think
the Princess Bride example.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you know that. And he's, and there's a $5 billion shortfall, and this is just like he's only been in office a couple months. What's going to be left of New York?
And they have record income because of the fact that they had a hefty capital gains realization because they had all these Wall Street people getting bonuses. And so city revenue has doubled and even state tax revenues up 2/3 since 2019. So it's kind of like the federal government. We have record amounts of money coming into the federal government, and we're still running $2 trillion deficits. So something's got to give. But let's try to keep New York City from completely falling off the edge of the planet, because this man is convinced that either he has to raise property taxes so much that then you will have all sorts of millionaires and businesses taking off. And you say, well, they can afford it. No, because the 3 million residential properties are the ones that are going to have to pay the taxes. The 100,000 commercial buildings are going to have to pay the taxes. And those are the places where the poor and the middle class live, right?
Well, and these are the people who produce jobs. So that New Yorkers have, can have jobs, and that, that there is a Broadway, and that I said off the air, my concern is someone who does occasionally, go to New York, and go to Broadway plays. I'm not so sure I want to go, because I think his hostility towards the police, his hostility actually even to the firefighters. Wow. This is. And again, there's other part of me that says they get what they deserve.
Yeah,
they elected this guy, but I know you. I knew when you sent this that you sent this for me, and thank you. It allows me to get my outrage out on something that really have no control over. But God bless them in New York. This is back to our thing. Just pray for them, pray for the church in New York, and for the believers in New York. But this is outrageous.
It is, and you do have control over it, because as some people are probably finding out, you really love to go to some of those Broadway plays, but you're thinking twice about whether or not you want to go
I told
there.
my wife we're not going to New York.
Yeah, isn't that something? Well, we come back. I just thought for a minute, I also put this one up for baseball. And yes, anybody watching you online right now can see that you're wearing the championship dress. So just thought it'd be fun to end with something a little bit fun. It's been quite excursion today. We'll come back and finish that off right after this.
After a House vote that ended the recent mercifully short government shutdown, Speaker Mike Johnson fielded questions from reporters. He probably didn't expect to be asked to interpret Scripture that day, but he did a great job of it. The questioning reporter began by invoking the Pope. He said Pope Leo has cited Matthew 25:35 to critique Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. In an exhortation last October, the Pope quoted Christ's words, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me," stating that the Church has always recognized in migrants a living presence in the world. Speaker Johnson promised to post a theological dissertation he drafted during the Biden administration. He proceeded to give the reporters a quick summary, stating, "Borders and walls are biblical. From the Old Testament to the New, God has allowed us to set up our civil societies and have separate nations." He acknowledged that we are to welcome the sojourner and love our neighbor as ourselves, and continued, "But what's also important in the Bible is that assimilation is expected and anticipated and proper. When someone comes into your country, comes into your nation, they do not have the right to change its laws or to change its society. They're expected to assimilate. We haven't had a lot of that going on." Reporting on the speaker's remarks, the Washington Stand's Joshua Arnold pointed to God's command to Moses in Deuteronomy 31:12. "Assemble the people, men, women, and little ones, and the sojourner within your towns, that they may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to do all the words of this law." Now that's assimilation. The Washington Stand report refers to Mike Johnson's posted defense of immigration enforcement, in which he differentiates between the admonition to welcome the sojourner directed at individuals and Romans 13 command that civil authorities bring punishment upon the wrongdoer. We enforce borders for love of the people inside them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention real quickly that, of course, next week we're going to be covering a lot of issues. There is a conversation I'm going to have with Stephen Meyer about the upcoming Discovery Institute event, which we'll talk about that conference. We'll be talking with Parker Eng of Day 4 about the plan that Elon Musk has to put 1 million satellites in the atmosphere and what that's going to mean, and the whole issue of the Artemis rocket and some of the other things we're learning about space. So we'll get into that. I know certainly one of the things I want to talk to you about, Liberty, is you've got a number of guests that you'll be dealing with on Wednesday, which will be talking about a film and also technology issues, right?
Yes, I'm really excited to interview Claire Morrell. Her book, The Tech Exit, came out a few months ago, and it was so good. So if you are wondering, where do I draw the line with my kids and technology and screen time, it is a very data-driven book, but easy to read, and she gives some great guidance and research on that. And then we'll also be talking about something fun. We'll be talking about I Can Only Imagine Part 2. We've got the director and the leading actor that will be that I'll be talking with that day. So I'm really excited about that. I'll be screening the movie this weekend in preparation.
And I might just mention that you'll be talking about technology on Wednesday, but on Thursday we got Fuz Rana, who's been on the program before, on being human in an age of technology. So we will maybe get a 1-2 punch on some of that as well. But I thought it'd be fun just to talk about the fact that many of us around the table love baseball. And Liberty, you got to realize that Jeff even goes to pre-season games. These are the exhibition games and all the rest. And so one of these historians that we quote so often in terms of the American Revolution and American history is Alan Gulzo, but he calls it the all-American game. And he says, in the largest sense, baseball is a mirror of American history at its opening. He talks about the fact that it is a place where indeed you can provide an opportunity for individuals that maybe are too short for basketball, maybe too slow even for soccer, to actually play the game. It's a game of numbers, and in some respects it's part of the American heritage. And so once again, Jeff, I posted that because nobody loves baseball more than you and your dad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think, I mean, baseball is America. I mean, I just think it is a picture, and this was a pleasure to read because it also Alan Gulzo is one of my favorite history professor. I actually got to do an online course with him, and he's an expert on Abraham Lincoln. So I'm not surprised there wasn't an Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
And I did not know that Abraham Lincoln played an earlier version.
Wow.
I think it was called Rounders,
Rounders.
Which was sort of a to baseball. But I just think, I mean, I think, you know, for me, and maybe this may be just a male thing, but I know with my dad, and I love Field of Dreams. I've not watched it yet, but I will watch it sometime this spring before baseball starts again. But I think it is a dad, and this is, and my daughter will disagree with this because her and I enjoy baseball. So let's just say it's a dad child experience, and it's an opportunity. And I found this with my own dad. You know, we can have disagreements on a lot of issues, but we have a lot of commonality in baseball. And it is rare, and I talk to him about once a week. It is rare, no matter whatever the time of the year is, that we don't at one point there's some mention of how baseball is going. Of course, I'm a Texas Ranger fan, having been down here for almost 40 years, and so converted pretty early to the Texas Rangers. My dad remains a loyal Pittsburgh Pirate fan because I grew up in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And it's not, I don't have a dislike of the Pirates, and we'll root for them. But I do think that baseball so much, it is America. And I think, and I go back and reading this article, one thing that is not mentioned, but to me, one of the unifying moments after 9/11 was when George W. Bush throws out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium. Yeah. And I still can't watch that and not get teary-eyed.
Yeah.
And I did have, the first time I saw it, it was more than teary-eyed.
Oh, yeah.
Because it really was, and I think it's America's game. and the rest of the world has not caught up. And I get that the world's game may be what they call football, we call soccer, but America's game, with all respect to football, which is certainly sitting in Dallas, Texas, football is very important to Texans, but America's game is baseball.
And he talks about baseball's professional fields originated in major urban areas, and that's where you had, of course, this explosive growth and kind of industrialization and standardization. It's where at least you had the pastoral space. I remember George W. Bush's wife actually said that one of the things she loved about watching the Rangers when he was the owner of the Rangers is just looking out on the grassy field. And sometimes that is the case. But he also talks about how that gave you the rural gentleness. In baseball, one touches a base to be safe. A runner comes home to score. An unsuccessful batter is merely out. Even the offside zones of right field and left field are foul territory. Just all sorts of aspects of that. So certainly it's something that unifies Americans, although it's become kind of international. But I thought for just a minute, Liberty, we've had the Olympics. And I've seen some of these commercials where they show football fans of two different stripes coming together, or baseball fans. And when you watch the Olympics, that brings us together as well, doesn't it?
It does. You know, I will admit I haven't been following them as closely this time around, but I love the patriotism, Team USA, and I loved watching ice skating as a child. So with the Winter Olympics, that my parents would always have that on, and it was just so beautiful. I love, it's a beautiful sport. So I was happy that Alyssa Liu, I think I'm saying her name correctly,
that's correct, yeah.
Won the gold medal in women's ice skating, and so she's for Team USA, of course, has an amazing story. Her parents, escaping China from Tiananmen Square protest. She lived the American dream. Now she's a gold medalist for Team USA. I mean, how much more patriotic can you get than that?
Probably one, because she didn't care in some respects, because she had been off for about 2.5 years, comes back, really has no great expectation to win, and just seeing her jump up and down when she realizes at first, because she still had two people behind her, that she's going to medal, but number two, then realizing she won the gold. Wow. And all of the rest. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, maybe she did so well because she really had no expectation. There wasn't a lot of pressure on her. But if nothing else, there have been a couple of things that you wish hadn't been said at the Olympic Games. But overall, that's just another unifying aspect of sports, right? No,
absolutely. And I mean, is there any more iconic sports moment? This is a baseball guy saying this. I think the most American iconic moment in sports is the 1980 U.S. hockey team, where these college students coming together and beating the evil empire, which was literally the evil empire at that time to eventually then win gold. And just an update is they're playing right now. The U.S. hockey team is playing in the semifinals right now as we speak. Yeah. So I'm not going to tell people the score, because they'll have to tune in and see.
Yeah, and I'm looking across at somebody who's waving at us as well, who's our engineer, who was not alive back in 1980. And again, when we old folks talk about 1980, some of the younger ones around here are saying, well, I wasn't around then, but you'll have your own experiences.
Well, there's a Netflix documentary, and there's a movie on it.
The movie.
So she can watch that.
Yeah, I have heard of it. And so that is certainly the case. And that's the other thing. The young man, and I've blanked on his name, that is a speed skater. He's kind of this generation's Eric Heiden. And I mean, you just have some great
wonderful
stories
story.
Like that.
Who was motivated as seeing I can't say. I always get it. It's not Yoko Ono. It's the other Anton Onyo. Yeah. Seeing him as a 5-year-old, and he's inspired to do.
He's inspired to do that. Well, we're out of time, but nothing else. Megan, I want to thank you for engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Thank both of you for being a part of that, and hope you'll join us next week here on Point of View. Visit these articles, all available at the website Point of View. We'll see you back here on Monday.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently, or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.